Yokozunas of UI, it's Professor Gallagher, and in this lesson we're going to learn to use the minimum scale factor to get our text into a specific text view frame size. And we'll get our first look at animations in SwiftUI by exploring the animation modifier. Let's learn big! If you're new here, welcome. You might want to check out the course playlist to see how we got here. So by the end of the last lesson, we had a bunch of inspirational phrases in our app and a set of 9 images. And if we clicked our show message button, we would cycle through all the messages and images. And when we got to the end of a message or image, the message would cycle back to the first message that we had, the image would cycle back to the first image we had. This way, when we clicked our button, it would go through all the messages and all the images available. Now that's cool, but there are a few things that I'd like to fix in this app. First, I'd like to push the message to the top and have the image view below this. So to do this, I'm going to cut out the spacer at the top. I've still got a spacer down below that'll push the text and the image up top and the button down. And then I'll highlight the text view with all of its modifiers, cut it out, and paste it to the top of the V stack. And this looks good. But when I get to a long phrase like the genius bar phrase, my last phrase here, this runs across multiple lines, and it takes up more space than the other phrases, and the top of my image is pushed down a little bit. In fact, so it's easier to see, why don't we copy the last phrase that's our longest phrase, we'll put it in the second phrase so it shows up earlier when we're clicking through our app messages. So now my longest phrase shows up with my second click, so how can we ensure that the messages are all inside of a text view that has the same height? Well, in an earlier lesson we learned about the frame modifier, and we can use that. Now we really only care about the height of the text view, we don't care about the width. The width can take up as much space as it needs, so let's enter a .frame modifier here with HE following the word frame, and see how this highlights the height parameter in here. It's in the optional parameter list, but it's dark. When we press return, it enters just the height parameter in the frame. Now why don't we set this to 130 points, and we can try it out. And now all the messages are in a 130 point tall frame, and all of our images start right below the frame. Nice! Now you might wonder, professorial chin stroke, what would happen if I had a message that was so big that it wouldn't fit into that frame? Well, let's try it out. Let's go down to our messages array, and why don't we add a new phrase for the second item, something really long. You can put whatever you want in here. I'll say, Gadzooks, my friend, I am astonished at how utterly magnificent you are. Now let's try out our app, and hey, look at this. That second phrase is so long, it can't fit into our frame. We see it's cut off at the end with 3 dots. Yikes! Well, how do we prevent that from happening? Well, if we still want the text to be inside of a frame that's 130 points high, we can use another modifier to shrink the font of our text view into the available space. And it looks like we don't have this problem with the genius bar phrase, just with the second one. So let's enter it up here in the text view modifiers. We'll add it just below the multi-line text alignment modifier. And to use this, we'll say dot, and it's called minimumScaleFactor. So as you start to type in minimum, you'll see it shows up in code completion. Code completion says this sets the minimum amount the text in this view scales down to fit the available space. So SwiftUI will try all of the values until it finds the largest value it can scale the text down so that it fits in the available space. So if I enter 0.5 in here, that's a 50% minimum scale factor. So the smallest I'll scale down my font size is 50% of what the original is. It starts at 1.0 and then goes down, but it won't get any smaller than 50% or 0.5. It'll stop there. So it'll use a bigger value if it can, but it'll never scale the text down smaller than 50% of its current size. Now 50% is a good size to set. If you need to go any smaller, then you probably want to rethink the phrases you're using in your app or your user interface. So let's press return to accept this. We'll enter 0.5 here, and we'll try it out. And when we run the app, we see the first message is in standard large text. Click again, and we see the second message. Hey, look at this. It's smaller. It's been scaled to some factor between 1.0 and 0.5, but it all fits in here. It's not being cut off with the ellipsis, the 3 dots. Great! Now if we click on the third one, the genius bar message doesn't seem to have shrunk. But if we change our frame height to, say, 100 instead of 130, then if we click on the second one, we see that shrunk. Ooh, and look, the third one is shrunk down too. So it used to be that this third value was on 3 lines. Now it's only on 2 lines. Cool. So now that we know how to use this, I'm going to change the frame height back to 120. I like that size, and I'm going to get rid of this super long phrase with the gadzooks. I don't really need that. You know what, I'll set frame height to 100 instead of 120, just so that I get a little bit of minimum scale factor in there. Feel free to change that as it suits your phrases. And now you know how minimum scale factor works. Now the next thing I want to change is the transition between phrases and images. Watch what happens in the app each time we click Show Message. I see a new message and a new phrase, but it shows up very abruptly. Now, in most professional apps you'll use, oftentimes you'll notice some kind of transition when views change. It's usually a soft fade or dissolve transition. Well, iOS makes it super easy to perform some basic animations. Let's explore the animation modifier. And we'll first use this on the image view. So after our last modifier, let's add dot animation. And we see a few options in here. Select the one that has animation and value parameters. Now, code completion says applies the given animation to this view when the specified value changes. So for the value, we put in a variable, and whenever that variable changes, the animation will trigger. Since we're doing this under the image view, we'll put the image name variable in here. Whenever the image name changes, we'll run our animation. But this first parameter has an animation type in here. What's that? Well, let's press return to accept this and use our buddy dot notation to uncover the options. And there are a lot in here. Some of these are more complex and require additional parameters, but let's start simply. So if we select default, the current default in iOS is what we call easeInOut. For views, that's simply a fade in and out, and what it does is it starts off slowly, gets up to full animation speed, and then winds down slowly. This is a really nice transition because it seems less abrupt, so let's start with dot default. We'll set the value to image name so that the animation triggers when the image name changes. And let's try this out and pay special attention to the speed of the fade in and out. Now, I'm not sure if you can see this. The speed of the fade starts slower, gets fast, and then slows down again. It's a bit more noticeable when transitioning between images of different sizes. The ease in and out seems more natural and fluid, kind of like if you were running, you wouldn't go at top speed right away. It would take you a while to ease up to top speed, and then when you stop, you don't stop right away. You sort of ease down. It's a nice fluid effect, and just to show you the difference, why don't we change default to linear? So that's going to keep the fade animation the same speed without any ease in or out, and pay attention as we click. So you don't notice that nice fade, it's all one speed. I think it's more abrupt. In most cases, ease in and out is a better choice. That's why Apple made it default. Now, there are a lot of other options in here. You can research these in the documentation, and remember, some of these require additional parameters. But just to show you one more, let's try .bouncy. And you might not notice it until we transition between views of different sizes, but you should see a small bounce. You see it in there? We can try it again. So it's just a subtle bounce. Again, one of many options available to you. It's just a tiny overshoot bouncing back. And now just to show you, there is a version of .bouncy with parameters. So if I delete this and then retype .bouncy, there's an option in here with duration and extra bounce. Duration is how long animations take, and I believe this animation takes 0.35 seconds on average. Now, extra bounce will increase the bounciness the higher the number is, so let's press return and accept this. We'll say 0.5 seconds, so the duration's a little bit longer, and we'll set 0.2, that's a good extra bounce. And now as we click, we can definitely see it's a little bit more noticeably bouncy. It looks like there's a couple of bounces at the end instead of just one. Now you do want to be careful with extra bounce. Values above 0.2 can be so bouncy that images might be distorted. Why don't we change the extra bounce to 0.5? And as we click, we sort of see the image flash as the compression becomes really visible. It distorts the animation. So as a rule of thumb, any extra bounce above 0.2 risks being distracting rather than delightful. So I'm going to go back to the default animation, and the goal really in most apps is not to overpower the user with cool animations. In fact, default is nice because it's not really noticeable. You might notice if it's not there, but the subtle transition seems really natural. In most cases, that's what you want to go for. So here we can try this out again. It looks good, but we're not seeing an animation in the text view when the text view changes, and you might wonder, can I apply the animation to the text view as well? Let's copy the animation modifier from image view, paste it below the text view, and we could leave the animation to trigger when the image name changes, but since we're under the text view, why don't we change this so that the animation runs when the message changes, although really the message and the image name change together, so it doesn't really matter. And let's try this out. And hey, our animation works on the text view as well. Although keep clicking. It's almost too much animation, isn't it? You really notice the fade. Well, we can fix this by choosing a shorter duration for the animation. That'll make the animation run faster and it'll be less noticeable, but it'll still produce a nice effect that doesn't seem like an abrupt shift from one view to the other. So let me show you how we can achieve this. We're going to go and switch from default, so let's delete that, and we're going to enter .easeInOut. Now remember, that's the same as default, but .easeInOut also has an option with duration. This allows us to specify the duration of the animation, so press return to accept this, and since the standard duration is 0.35 seconds, let's change this to 0.15 second, and look at that. As we click through here, I think that's nicer, subtler. It's a good in-between from abruptly changing the text or offering too much animation. Now, there's a lot more we could do with animations. You can even write your own animations. We'll be covering more animations in future lessons, but even as a new SwiftUI programmer, you can see that this simple animation modifier provides a nice touch to improve your user interface. You can use this in any situation where you're transitioning between views. So once again, we had more big learning. We investigated minimum scale factor so that we could shrink text to fit an available frame. We learned about the rule of thumb not to go below 0.5 as your minimum scale factor. And we worked with basic animations using the animation modifier. We checked out default, ease in, out, linear, bouncy. But when using bouncy, we learned to keep the extra bounce at 0.2 or below. And we worked with animation duration. It was our first taste of adding a little bit of delight to our app, but there's lots more goodness to come. Continue to hack.